Welcome back, boys. In our previous class, we had a discussion on a topic, the Earth, our living planet. Today, further continue with the same. In my previous class, we had a discussion on important concepts related to introduction to Earth, what is the size of the Earth, and also about the shape of the Earth. These are the two major concepts that we come across. Further continue with the same. We shall proceed further. In the previous class, we had a discussion on regarding the diameter, equatorial diameter and as well as the polar diameter. The theory proved that the Earth is not a round in shape, it is a shape of a geoid. Earth consists of both land as well as the water bodies. 29.22% of land and almost 71% or 70.78% that contains water. Yes. When we say the water and as well as the land, distribution of land and water bodies, what is the percentage of land and the water? When we come across this, we shall have a discussion on the land masses that mainly contains the continents. The continents are what we have today. And the water bodies that mainly contains the oceans. Land and water. Land, continents, water bodies, oceans. Further go with the same. Distribution of land and water. Land and water bodies. Going to this. Coming to this land, 29.22% of the entire globe or the Earth contains land. When we say this land, we have 7 continents. You all are very familiar with the 7 continents on the globe. You can just revise yourself. So this, Asia. Africa. Europe, North America, South America, Australia, and last, Antarctica. These are the 7 important continents that we can see on the globe. Out of these 7 continents, dear students, the Asia is the largest continent, whereas the Australia is the smallest continent. Asia is the largest continent, whereas the Australia is the smallest. Yes, these are the points on about the land part. Coming to the water bodies. The large portion of our Earth contains water, isn't it? The major part of our Earth that contains water. Let us we have a discussion on this area today. Water. 70.78% of our earth contains water, and this includes four important oceans. What are the four important oceans that includes underwater? Coming here, number one, Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean, isn't it? It is the largest ocean. Coming to the second, Atlantic Ocean. Indian Ocean. And the last part of the ocean, it is called as Arctic Ocean. Out of these, Pacific Ocean is the largest as well as the deepest ocean. Arctic is the smallest ocean. This is the smallest. Largest and deepest. You can use the same too. Largest ocean as well as deepest. Deepest ocean. So these are the points to keep in mind. Connection with the distribution of land and water. Land contains 7 continents, whereas the water contains 4 oceans. 7 continents, that includes Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, South America, Australia and Antarctica. Whereas to that side, water bodies, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean and as well as Arctic Ocean. So these are the 4 oceans and 7 continents that we need to keep in mind. With all these, as I told you, distribution of land and water bodies, 29%, 29.22% of land and 70.78% of water, it is unevenly distributed. It is unevenly distributed. If you take the globe, major portions of land masses or the land area that covers in the northern hemisphere, the major water content that we can see in the southern hemisphere. So therefore, northern hemisphere, that we also call it as the land hemisphere, the southern hemisphere we also call it as water hemisphere. You know, dear students, you have learnt in class 5th or 6th, the earth or the globe divides into 2 equal half, northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. Let me explain that with the help of diagram. This is the shape of the earth, geoid shape of the earth. Coming to this, earth divides into 2 equal halves. One is this, we call it as northern hemisphere. This is southern hemisphere. Isn't it? This northern hemisphere contains more of land, whereas the southern hemisphere contains more of water. So therefore, northern hemisphere we can also call it as land hemisphere. This can also be called it as land hemisphere. The southern hemisphere can also be called as water hemisphere. It is also called as water hemisphere. Here, what is the percentage of land that covers in the northern hemisphere? As I told you, 60% of land and the 40% of the water that we can see here. 60% of the land and 40% of water we can see in the northern hemisphere. Whereas coming to the southern hemisphere, it is more of water and less of land. How much it contains? 81% that covers water, whereas only 19% covers land. So therefore, northern hemisphere we call it as land hemisphere because of more percentage of land that covers there. Southern hemisphere contains more percentage of water, hence we call it as water hemisphere. Hope this concept is very clear, dear students. The northern hemisphere and as well as the southern hemisphere, how we call it as a northern hemisphere as a land hemisphere, whereas the southern hemisphere we call it as a water hemisphere. With all these concepts, we are ending with distribution of land and water bodies, and our next concept, it's all about latitudes and longitudes. Hope you are all very familiar with these two words, latitudes and longitudes. Before I start the latitudes and longitudes, it is very important to know why this latitudes and longitudes play a very important role when we are discussing on such concepts called Earth. Why it is very important? Latitudes and longitudes are in just an imaginary lines that drawn on the globe. For what purpose? Why we have drawn this on the globe? It's an imaginary lines. It is because for so many advantages, for so many benefits, for so many uses. Number one, latitudes and longitudes are drawn on the globe to know the exact time of a place. Latitudes and longitudes drawn on the globe to know the exact place. Yes, time and place. It is very helpful to locate the places. It helps to know about the time of the different places. It is almost 3:45 here, or it is 5 o'clock here, or it is 12 o'clock here. What is the time that we can see in other country? Now the time is somewhere around 9:45 here. What is the time in America? Whether it is a day or a night. What time we have in European countries? Take London as an example. What is the time in Sydney now? For this, we need latitudes and longitudes to know the exact time of a place. Yes, it is very important to know the direction, east and west direction from the fixed point, whether you are traveling to the west or to the east. Say for example, you are in New Delhi. If you want to go to Tokyo, whether you are moving to the west or to the east, you are moving to the east. If you want to go for London, whether you are moving to the west or to the east, you are moving to the west. So like that, it is very important to know about it. Networks of the lines that we have drawn on the globe, that is what the latitudes as well as the longitudes. The latitudes are drawn from east to west, whereas the longitudes drawn from north to south. That I will explain by writing diagram on the board. Before that, the latitudes and the longitudes that intersects each other. that intersecting of latitudes and longitudes, that point we call it as a grid, G-R-I-D, grid. So for example, there is a space here, we shall make use of the space. This is the latitudes, and these are all the longitudes. Latitudes and the longitudes are meeting up at a place, and I will going with this, and this part or this intersecting of latitudes and longitudes are called grid, G-R-I-D. It's better if I write outside of it. Call it as a grid. Intersecting of latitudes and longitudes, we call it as grid. At a right angle, it will intersect at the right angle. Yes, dear boys.